Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the COP Council. How are we? Hopefully, everyone's having a fantastic Wednesday, wherever you are around the world. As you can see, it is a very, very special episode. Of course, we do tend to do these now and again. And of course, we are joined by the Athletics, James Pierce. James, hopefully, you're having a fantastic Wednesday, my friend.
Good evening. Yeah, all good. Thanks. Yeah, first day back in work today after a week off with it being the international break. So, plenty to catch up on.
Indeed, of course. Obviously, plenty happened over the last 24 hours, which we'll get into in a moment. But of course, it's probably nice to have the week off, considering, again, international break is normally a time of quietness. But I think this international break has been a bit different with all the news that's come out.
Yeah. I think obviously there was a few little scares, wasn't there, on the way with Alisson getting concussed and, of course, Gravenberch having to withdraw from the Netherlands squad. Although I'd expect both of them to be fine for the Merseyside derby next Wednesday. So yeah, and then of course all the noise around Trent over kind of the last 24 hours plus. Although the reality is that nothing has actually changed with Trent. There's still no official clarity regarding it. It's just, I think it's more the fact that an international break, when there's a bit of a lull, people are looking for things to fill the void, and of course that the reports that I think started off in Spain on Monday night, then got picked up by a radio station here on Tuesday morning, and then it kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned straight away, and I think it is obviously the perfect place to start in Trent to Real Madrid. I think your colleague David Ornstein mentioned, of course, Real Madrid, now trying to accelerate the move on a free transfer. I think the general feeling has been one of anger, I think, over the last 24 hours, especially with certain things that have come out over the last 24 hours. Obviously, a lot of it has come from Spain, and a lot of it has come from different outlets towards more so Madrid side. Like you said, in terms of Liverpool side, it's not really come out yet from a Liverpool point of view, even though there's been a few inklings. But what is the absolute latest with Trent and that whole scenario, and how do we know any time frame as of now of how long his decision has been made up already?
No, I'd say there's still a lack of clarity regarding exactly, I think that there's been this kind of increasing belief that Trent would leave. I think that's been a feeling for a number of months, really. I think you go back to just going into the January window when, of course, Real Madrid's approach to buy him for about £20 million got instantly rejected by Liverpool. I think we all know that something like that, the clubs don't just take a shot in the dark at something like that. So, and I think we all knew as well that, come January the 1st, when they were able to officially speak to him, that kind of charm offensive would be absolutely cranked up. So, yeah, I think the lack of positive noises in terms of the discussions he's had with Liverpool have kind of made it sort of increased the likelihood that he would leave. And the status, as I understand it at the moment, is that Real Madrid are still working to try and finalise it. That despite there was obviously reports that it's a done deal. It's everything's signed and sealed. If that's the case, then certainly Liverpool don't know about it. Liverpool have not been told that Trent Alexander-Arnold intends to leave at the end of the season. They certainly haven't been told by Real Madrid, because the way these things work is when there's a formal agreement that's been signed, the Real Madrid have to let Liverpool know, and that hasn't happened. So people close to Trent insist that it's not done, but of course you speak to people in Spain, and there's a huge confidence that they will complete the signing of Alexander-Arnold on a free transfer come the summer. People over there have been convinced of that for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think that's I think obviously with different outlets coming out with different things yesterday. I think one thing, one piece in particular that I thought was very hilarious, to be honest, in terms of Madrid potentially asking Liverpool to release Trent a bit earlier, or working on a deal because they play in the Club World Cup in June. I think it begins in the middle of June, I believe. I'm not too sure on it, but is there any type of truth in that at all, or would Liverpool, if it was for him to be going to Real Madrid, of course, at the end of his contract, would that be again 1st of July, or would Liverpool even entertain anything in terms of Real Madrid asking a bit early? If we give a certain amount, we'll release him a bit earlier to you.
Yeah, well, I think at the minute it's hypothetical because, of course, until Real Madrid ask that question, I don't know what the answer from Liverpool is going to be. But I think it stands to reason that if Liverpool were going to let Alexander-Arnold go before his contract expires, that would have to come at a price. Because why would you just if you're about to lose someone of such great value for nothing? I'd be amazed if Liverpool just said, well, okay, rather than his contract running out at the end of June, we're prepared to kind of waive like the whole of June, say, and essentially he can be your player from the start of June onwards. I think if they want him for the Club World Cup, then there'd be a price attached to that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Well, in terms of again with Trent, and obviously if it is the fact that he's going to Real Madrid, in terms of Liverpool, right here, right now, in terms of the players that are at Liverpool, obviously Conor Bradley. The biggest problem with Conor Bradley is probably injuries. I think that obviously for somebody who's so young, I think everybody has got onto that. But have Liverpool taken that aspect of it? Of again, I've looked at it and gone, well, if Trent's going to leave, we need potentially a replacement, or are they going to probably promote Conor Bradley to the number 1 spot and then have a backup for him?
Yeah, I think that is still to be determined. I think what we do know, and I've seen a lot of noise over the last 24 hours that kind of almost as if Liverpool have been, suggestion that Liverpool have been kept hanging on or messed about by, it dragging on so long. I think and until we get some certainty, I don't think the details around this saga are going to properly emerge. But I think, it stands to reason that, if you're Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes, you would have had a pretty good idea of the direction of travel for this for a number of months. Contingency plans would have been drawn up in the same way as contingency plans would have been drawn up for if Van Dijk and Salah don't sign their extensions, and shortlists drawn up and background checks and character references and everything else, all the due diligence that Liverpool would do. So yeah, whether they go for kind of a big name it right back, and then you almost have Conor Bradley trying to compete with someone who's come in like that, or you sign a younger player who's more of a kind of level playing field for Bradley, maybe. That's still to be determined. I don't know whether Liverpool have already decided who their Alexander-Arnold replacement is going to be. I think what we do know is that they will, undoubtedly recruit someone in that position, because as good as Conor Bradley is, and Slot loves him, I think he's a really good fit for what Slot wants in a fullback. As you said, his fitness issues are a concern, and that was why I always found it laughable after the kind of the fallout from the Manchester United home game in January, when of course Trent struggled that day. I think all the noise around him certainly had an effect, and some people were saying, well, that's it, cast him aside, just play Bradley for the rest of the season. And it's like, well, just look at how many games back to back Conor Bradley's played in his career. It's a real different challenge being able to do it every 3 or 4 days, and I think he's still growing, and I'm sure those muscle issues are as a result of that. So yeah, there's no doubt that Liverpool will need to recruit in that role. I think we know the kind of profile. It will be someone in their probably early to mid 20s. I think you can probably discount anyone kind of 27, 28 from the equation. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which direction Liverpool going. But I think the other thing I'd say in terms of a replacement is you're wasting your time trying to find someone like a like-for-like replacement. That just doesn't exist. I think Alexander-Arnold, his skill set was so special in that position that Liverpool are going to have to evolve stylistically, which I don't necessarily see as a bad thing, because I think that can make you less predictable and more of an unknown quantity if you rather than always looking to Trent to create.
Yeah, no, I think it's like you say, trying to get a like for like replacement, I think, is virtually impossible, really, unless of course you're going to create somebody who can cross and then obviously deliver a ball like Trent. But I think maybe, in your opinion, I think for my opinion, I feel like we've kind of seen maybe a reduced Trent this season, certainly towards maybe, again, the style that Arne Slot has chose to go down. Like, again, we're not seeing Trent play more of an advanced, wing back, really. We're more seeing him as a traditional right back, where, again, Arne Slot has said plenty of times, hasn't he, that he would like Trent to stay. But in his system, is it such a massive loss in terms of, again, the player's a massive loss, 100%, but in terms of system, is it a huge loss where Liverpool, might be better off in terms of system-wise, not losing Trent, but again, maybe adding like names like obviously Jeremy Frimpong's been mentioned and other players like that in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate. I think because I think the other thing that feeds into that is, I think we've seen it with Slot, more and more this season, is the midfield are a lot more involved in creativity, which means that there is less of an emphasis on Trent to always be the one to provide that kind of creative spark. I think if this was happening, say, in a kind of a Jurgen Klopp team that always kind of looked to Trent, you think back to when they were in that slump and the kind of they first kind of tried the inverted fullback role with Trent, and that got Liverpool going, didn't it? It was like so much of that resurgence was based around him. Whilst I think you're right that it has been a different Trent this season with what he's been asked to do, and that, in theory, that should cushion the blows somewhat, but then the other side,
still Trent.
You only had to watch the Carabao Cup final. I'm not saying that Liverpool just lost that game because of Trent being out injured, but I think anyone watching that game would have been crying out for thinking, if only Trent was out there, he might just be able to provide that spark that was so, glaringly missing on the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I 100% agree with you. I think, again, it's something where, again, I think it has a lot frustrated a lot of Liverpool supporters. And I think rightfully so in many ways. I think there's certain things that I look at it and go, if this is true or if that's not true. Like I think I saw reports claiming that Trent had decided that back in 2023 that he wanted to leave the club, which, again, I think, obviously coming from Spain, you got to take it with a pinch of salt. But for you, would it, again, I think we spoke back like 6 months ago in terms of, I think even you said at the time that Trent, again, is probably the one you wanted to tie down. And obviously out of the two, obviously it's Salah, it's Van Dijk, and obviously Trent. But how did the club view this in terms of Trent? Is it a massive, if he was to leave, is it a massive like negative point in the fact that they've not been able to change his mind or not been able to get him to re-sign? Because I think everybody's frustration is, of course, people will go FSG and obviously with the board. I think for me, the big problem is the fact we've had 4 sporting directors over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's kind of been a problem where, again, it's kind of felt that the one sporting director has kind of gone, the other sporting director will sort it out. And then it's kind of been left to now where we're looking like our 3 best players is going to be leaving on a free.
Yeah. And I think all that kind of turbulence behind the scenes certainly hasn't helped, I think, in terms of the journey up to this point. Because you think back to, I think Trent signed extensions in 2017, 2019, 2021. So it stands to reason that, 2023, that summer, when he's down to his last 2 years, that's kind of when you would expect those discussions to happen. And, my information is that they weren't forthcoming. Of course, around that time was when Julian Ward was leaving after just a year in charge as sporting director. Jörg Schmadtke came in, and he said himself, didn't he, in interviews, he was there as a facilitator of transfers. He wasn't a sporting director in the kind of the all-encompassing role that usually involves, which of course contract renewals falls under that. And of course, then there was other factors with Mike Gordon wanting to take a step back, FSG looking for investment. Then you've got Klopp deciding he's going to go, that being a real close secret amongst a very small group of people for 2.5 months before Klopp announced it. And then everything then being on hold until the new sporting director and Slot came in. So we kind of know, don't we, how we reached last summer. The big question for me, which I don't know the answer to, and I don't know whether we will ever know the answer, is if Liverpool had been more kind of on the front foot and trying to get it sorted in the summer of 2023, would Trent have signed? I don't know the answer to that, because I think, and again, we need to be careful with there's a lot of things that have been written about this saga, which either I know not to be true, or I've got big doubts about whether it's true. But one thing that jumped out of me, and I think it was in the Marca report yesterday, and we know how closely aligned Marca are, was that they've seen this as a long-term project to make sure that Alexander-Arnold did not sign a contract renewal at Liverpool, because they only wanted him on a free transfer. So it stands to reason that if they have made that very, very clear a while back, then if he wanted the move to happen, then he had to essentially run down his contract. So I think at the minute it still feels like a bit of a weird situation, because obviously lots of people are talking as if he's gone, it's done, all the fallout has already started. But of course, you speak to people at Liverpool and they'll say to you, well, nothing's changed this week. We haven't been informed by Real Madrid that anything's been done. We haven't been informed by Trent that he's leaving. And again, people close to Trent saying similar, that nothing has yet been sorted. So I think once we get that clarity, then I think kind of more details will emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously we'll move on from Trent in that situation, but keeping on the contract talk, of course, obviously Van Dijk and Mo Salah, of course, I think everybody has had that kind of linked in with Trent of these two need to get sorted if, of course, Trent does leave. And again, is there any news in terms of Van Dijk and Salah? Is there any progressiveness in talks yet, or is it just, again, simply of the fact that Liverpool are not really coming out and saying anything yet?
Yeah, I was told that just those discussions are still ongoing. I can't quite believe that we're nearly in April and that is still the situation, but it is. And and again, there's been all I've heard so many kind of theories and suggestions about there's even talk about Van Dijk's contract and Salah's contract were done ages ago, and they were keeping it quiet because to avoid exerting too much pressure on Trent and all that. That I've been told by numerous people that is absolute nonsense, and that I think it's fair to say that if a contract was signed and sealed, then Liverpool would be shouting it from the rooftops, because why would you keep such good news quiet? So yeah, I think we're at a point where for Van Dijk and Salah, they've got a lot of thinking to do, haven't they, in terms of what do they want? I think clearly at this stage in their careers, it stands to reason that contract offers are going to be weighted more in the kind of direction of less guaranteed money and more bonus related triggering clauses and all the rest of it. I think that is the way. That's a sensible thing to do if you're giving out contract extensions to players in the twilight years of their career. I've always, right throughout, I've always been more optimistic about Van Dijk and Salah, to be fair, than Trent, because I think when you look at how different those kind of sagas are, that Real Madrid have been there, haven't they, with Trent, for so long, and we know, the lure of Real Madrid, whether it doesn't matter how big of a Liverpool fan you are. I think when you take a step back, you think, well, it is Real Madrid, and it's a difficult club to say no to. But I think the lack of noise around Van Dijk and Salah regarding other options, and I still think that gives me confidence that there could yet be kind of a positive resolution with both of them, because yes, it's a gamble. I think it's always got to be a gamble where you commit huge resources to players who will be turning 33 and 34 this summer. But I also think, the flip side of that is, well, good luck trying to replace Van Dijk this summer. Good luck trying to find someone who's going to score you probably 40 goals, which is probably what Salah's going to end up with this season. So yeah, still a lack of clarity on those two, but I don't sense any kind of defeatism that kind of, it's reached this point, so it's inevitable they will go. I think probably we've kind of reached a point now where they have to kind of, decision time is got to be just around the corner, because like I said, we're nearly in April.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on a personal side of point of view, I think for me, I think both will resign. I think everybody's had that same thought process with Trent, to the fact that Real Madrid, of course, are there. I think, again, though, to counteract that, I think some people are a bit annoyed because, again, obviously, I know people go back to, obviously, Steven Gerrard pretty much rejecting everybody for Liverpool Football Club, and kind of Trent obviously not potentially doing that as well. But we'll get away from the contract talk. I think before we just came on air as well, I believe there's been some news concerning 𝗟𝗶𝘃𝗃𝗍𝗃 𝗀𝗄𝗃 to Newcastle in terms of a link there as well. Of course, I think he was linked last season, obviously a part of that Anthony Gordon deal, or PSR deal, that was going to happen anyway. But is there any news concerning 𝗟𝗃𝗃𝗍𝗃 and a potential move away to Newcastle?
No, not to my knowledge. No, I did see that report. I think the report was kind of that Newcastle would like him, rather than they've been given any encouragement that he will be available. Of course, he's had an up and down season, hasn't he, Quansah? When you think of starting the season in the team, I think it certainly dented his confidence getting taken off like he did at Ipswich, and had a few tough games after that. But I think he's battled back pretty well, and I thought he was, I thought he was one of the few who could hold his head high after the Carabao Cup final, because no blame could be attached to him being thrown into a big contest like that. So yeah, I'd be really surprised if Liverpool were willing to sanction his sale. I mean, like, you're right, he was part of those discussions with Newcastle last summer. This isn't just a kind of a new thing that Newcastle like him. They wanted Quansah, plus money for Anthony Gordon in those discussions, and Liverpool were like, no, Quansah is not for sale. It's just, forget it. And then the conversation turned to Joe Gomez after that, and of course, Joe Gomez nearly ended up going. It was only because Newcastle were able to raise funds by selling two other players that meant those deals that were all set up fell through. So I think, like most things, it probably depends how high are Newcastle willing to go, because 𝗟𝗃𝗃𝗍𝗃 Quansah is a rarity, really, in terms of there aren't many better young English centre halves around like him. He's just been involved, obviously, in the England setup, and despite of course, Konaté has kind of re-established himself as first choice this season. I think with all the uncertainty surrounding his future as well, with only a year left on his contract, I'd be really surprised if Liverpool were prepared to sell Quansah. But yeah, like with anything, I guess it depends how high Newcastle are willing to go.
Yeah, well, you mentioned in terms of, again, the Anthony Gordon deal. Of course, I'm going to ask you about Alexander-Isak. Of course, probably been the best striker in the Premier League this season. Do you think there could be some type of deal? I know you mentioned in terms, again, obviously Quansah is someone who, again, Liverpool 12 months ago pretty much valued impossible to sell. But of course, I think for me, he's been kind of not in favour with Arne Slot. Not to say he's not played not in the squad, but again, he's been somebody who I think at the start of the season we would have 100% seen him probably in a rotation role alongside Ibu, but kind of hasn't been involved apart from recently with the squad. But just in terms of Alexander-Isak, is there a strong link there towards Liverpool in terms of, again, we know it's going to be an unbelievable deal if it's even possible to get him this summer. But is there anything there in terms of Liverpool, again, being on the list for a striker replacement this summer?
Yeah, I would expect Liverpool to be signing a centre forward this summer. I think that, I'd be amazed if Darwin Núñez was still at Anfield come the start of next season. Going to be interesting to see whether the Saudi interest kind of raises its head again regarding Núñez. We know that an intermediary contacted Liverpool back in January just to find out whether there was a deal that could possibly be done for Núñez to the Saudi Pro League, and Liverpool were adamant, in the same way that it was a straight no to Real Madrid regarding Alexander-Arnold. It was like, no for Núñez going anywhere, because there was still so much left to play for. And I think you only had to look at kind of what happened with Arsenal in January, not being able to bring someone in, that there was a kind of a dearth of available options. If you'd let Núñez go, well, who else would you have brought in? So, I think with Núñez's issues in terms of adapting to exactly what Slot wants, if the Saudis, say, for argument's sake, were willing to pay 60 or 70 million, then of course that could be a significant chunk towards what Newcastle would want for Isak. But yeah, for me, he would be perfect. I think I would absolutely love to see him come to Liverpool this summer. The one thing we know is that because he's still got a decent amount of time left on his contract, Newcastle will be absolutely loath to lose him. I've seen some reports about them, 150 million. Like I just don't see Liverpool even going close to 150 million. That's, for me, that's crazy number.
Is there a certain limit that Liverpool would go to? Again, obviously, I know player sales would have to be considered, and I think obviously other options as well. But are we talking like max maybe 120? Considering when you look at Liverpool.
There will be. I'm not privy to whether they've already put a kind of a maximum on it. I just think also you've got to look at what else needs to be done to the squad, and if you're signing a right back, well, how much is that going to cost? I think we all expect Liverpool to reinforce at left back. Say Tsiimikas goes, you're not going to get much for Tsiimikas. So, there's going to be, a big outlay probably at left back, especially if you go for, say, Kerkez, and Bournemouth talking about £50 million there. I think even if Van Dijk stays, I think Liverpool need to reinforce at centre back. Again, what kind of outlay are we talking about there? And then I think you look in midfield and you think, well, they probably need someone to ease the burden on Gravenberch. And then of course, top end of the pitch, we're talking about, aside from a centre forward, well, do they need a replacement for Salah if Salah doesn't sign his new deal? Will Chiesa move on because of his lack of options, or will he play more? Will Endo want to hang around and be a squad player again next season? Harvey Elliott obviously frustrated by a lack of game time. So there's so many question marks at the moment regarding this summer that and I think it'd be different if you looked at the squad and you thought, well, all Liverpool need this summer is a centre forward. Then I think it would be much easier to see a scenario where Liverpool could just go all in on Isak. But of course, it's I suppose in a similar, different scenario, but similarities with when they decided to drop out of the running for Bellingham, because it was like, well, hang on a minute, we need to rebuild an entire midfield rather than just bring in one elite player. And that might be the scenario this time around. But of course, if you say to get 70 million from Saudi for Darwin Núñez, that is potentially a big chunk of what you'd be of what Newcastle would want for Isak. And then I got some stick on social media last week because some of the aggregator accounts had decided to just focus on something I'd written in a column about Liverpool lost £57 million last year, and people always say to me, well, where's the money? Where Liverpool don't spend the money, and it's like, well, it's there in black and white. They made a £57 million loss, but what didn't get included in those aggregator tweets was like the next couple of paragraphs that was, well, actually since then the financial landscape is a lot more positive. Commercial revenues have gone past 300 million a year for the first time.
Champions League football as well.
Yeah, the return to the Champions League, massively lucrative. The fact they pretty much, obviously nailed on to have Champions League football again next season, that helps you in terms of budgets, in terms of planning for what kind of money you've got. Expecting Liverpool to announce very soon Far East tour this summer, the Adidas kit deal kicking in. So all these things mean that, that they are in a decent position. But of course, it's about juggling those resources, isn't it? And I think when you think back to the iconic team that Michael Edwards helped to build last time, it was only with the Coutinho money, wasn't it, when Liverpool went and bought the absolute finished article. You almost like nailed on, what you're going to get. You get the best goalkeeper in world football, you get the best centre-back in world football. More often than not, it was someone with a point to prove that might have had a few setbacks along the way that a number of other elite clubs weren't absolutely 100% sold on. And then Liverpool backed themselves, with their data models and all the rest of it, to believe, well, actually, no, we think this guy has got the potential to become world class. So that's going to be the intriguing thing for me, because I think we'll kind of see more of a return to that kind of way of recruiting.
I think I obviously, to kind of link in with the Isak stuff, I do think when you look at the market in terms of strikers in particular, I think even when we got Darwin Núñez, it was a very rare market to be going into. I think even in that summer, I think obviously the addition to Manchester City for Erling Haaland, and obviously us going for Darwin from Benfica, it does feels like, though, there are some names that are capable of getting. We mentioned Isak. Of course, if Newcastle don't get Champions League football, that's obviously a path that could be seen as well. But in your opinion, is there any other strikers at the minute that is getting spoken about at Liverpool? Obviously, I know there's obviously João Pedro, there's Matheus Cunha, there's, again, I think Hugo Nketiah as well is also from Frankfurt that's been spoken very highly. Is there any on your list that's been spoken about internally?
No, I mean, I've obviously some of those names you mentioned there, I've heard banded around, and you could almost name anyone playing at any decent level in terms of Liverpool doing their due diligence on, but no, in terms of anything concrete at the minute, it's just not there. I think it's probably a bit too soon. And like I said, I think Liverpool will have to react as well to what happens in terms of potential outgoings, and of course, I suppose, going back to what you said before about someone like Quansah, and especially with Trent as well, there's the homegrown issue as well, in terms of that's going to be another factor, obviously, in the summer, in terms of making sure that you satisfy the homegrown quota.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one player I did want to ask you about was, of course, you've spoken already about the left back position for Liverpool. I think even before, obviously, all the Trent news came out, and I think when we were looking at just the squad in general, I think obviously that left back area has been covered by Andy Robertson for so many years, very well. But I think one guy that's all been on everybody's lips is Milos Kerkez, in terms for Bournemouth. Had a fantastic season for Bournemouth. Of course, they could get European football. we know he's on the list for Liverpool, you know, in terms of the short list. Is there any developments in that, in terms of, again, obviously, I think Liverpool are obviously doing the due diligence in terms of, again, overall and looking at the player. But is there any news in terms of the left back spot in particular and Milos Kerkez?
No, only that he is someone Liverpool rate very highly. You know, of course, Richard Hughes knows all about him from, you know, his time at Bournemouth and the work that went into recruiting him before, of course, he left to join Liverpool. So I think with that one, it just comes down to what, you know, whether Liverpool can kind of justify that kind of outlay on the left back position in the kind of the overall scheme of things in terms of what they believe needs to be done. Because you know, I think the things that count in Kerkez's favour is he's still young. You know, he's energetic, he's dynamic. You know, I think he'd excite supporters. I think there's no doubt about that. You know, probably there is maybe that question mark in terms of, you know, has he done it at a decent level for long enough? But of course, you know, if you don't take the plunge this summer, then probably someone else will, because I think he has been that good. You know, so, you know, Liverpool won't be short on people to ask for kind of references about him. When you think, you know, his friendship with 𝗧𝗿𝗍𝗧 certainly stands out. So yeah, and then you've obviously also got to factor in, what does it mean for the players in that position that are already there? Because, you know, I didn't understand the kind of noise in January about, you know, Liverpool have to sign a left back in January, and it's like, well, Liverpool aren't going to carry 3 senior left backs for the second half of the season. You know, it's just not going to happen. And, you know, you can't just turn around to a player after the season and say, well, actually, we're signing, you know, you need to get off, because you know, that's just not the way that Liverpool would do things. So I think probably the most likely scenario would be that Robertson stays for his last year of his contract, and then, you know, Tsiimikas moves on. But then I guess, you know, again, that dynamic might hinge on, you know, I don't know the answer to the question of how Robertson would feel about taking on a lesser role and becoming kind of, you know, more of a, I suppose, a James Milner type, if you like, in terms of, you know, being absolutely brilliant to have around the place in terms of setting standards on a daily basis, but having to accept that you're not going to be playing week in, week out. Because, of course, if you spend, you know, 50 million quid or whatever it is that Bournemouth would want for Kerkez, you know, it's, you know, that goes without saying that he comes in to play. You know, he doesn't come in to kind of bide his time and be an expensive backup option to Robertson. So yeah, I think, you know, you know, there's been a few other names obviously banded around as well. You know, there's the young lad at Ajax, isn't there, he's got
Hato.
Hato. He's got the benefit of, obviously, he can play centrally as well, and again, you've got the close links there with the other Dutch lads at Liverpool already. So yeah, I certainly expect that to be an area where Liverpool strengthen this summer, but yeah, I think it's too soon to be certain about who will fill that gap.
Yeah, I think like what you just said in terms of, again, you know, the price point. Like I think even when you look at fullback, I still think Glenn Johnson is the highest transfer fee for that position, which I think goes back to 2009. But I think in terms of, like what you said, in terms of Liverpool will have to potentially go for him, because again, you've got other teams that will bite the bullet and go for him, in terms of, again, especially if the price is around 35-40 million for him in particular. But before we do shoot and wrap things up, I want to quickly ask you about obviously departures with the squad. We mentioned it a bit earlier on with the forward line, but I think you mentioned it in terms of, again, it does depend on obviously the summer signings on departures. And I think for me, obviously, the big talking point, I think, is maybe the midfield and the forward positions. I think, as expected, you know, again, with Van Dijk, if he does stay or if he doesn't go, I think, of course, we'll need a centre-back. But I think it is interesting, especially with fringe players as well, like Wataru Endo. I think Harvey Elliott is another player that, again, will cause a lot of conversation in the summer. But I think one guy for me is Luis Diaz as well. Not calling him a fringe player, but I think when we talk on the forward line, I think him especially is somewhere where you look at it and go, again, what do Liverpool do with him? Because I think he's in the last 2 years of his contract. There's clearly interest there from Saudi and teams like Barcelona. In your opinion, is there an idea of what Liverpool have in the summer, or have an idea of what they're going to be doing with him? Because again, I think obviously his team have come out recently and said that, again, they would expect a contract conversation very soon concerning his situation. But what's your information on fringe players around the squad?
Yeah, I think with Diaz, I mean, I don't think the situation is much different to what it was 12 months ago, where you think back to last summer, there was a lot of noise around him then, and talk about Barcelona being in for him, and certainly the feedback from our Spanish reporters at the time was that that wasn't the case, and that yes, Barcelona admired him, but they weren't looking to spend big on a player like him in that position. And I think from the people I spoke to, I got the impression that a lot of the noise was because he wanted improved terms at Liverpool, and it was, I think that probably a feeling of that might be a way to focus minds in terms of getting him tied down if you think he's a little bit unsettled. Although at no point did he ever tell Liverpool that he wanted to leave. And I think it feels like this summer it feels like something has to give in terms of, I think you either give him a new contract and you think, yes, Luis Diaz is going to be the answer for at least the next 2, if not 3 years. Or, because what is he? I think he's 28, isn't he, Diaz? It's, you're at that point where, it's 2 years left, 28, you don't want a situation where you're potentially losing him for nothing. And I think he would have a decent resale value this time around. I'm still not convinced that Barcelona, despite their admiration for him, there's been no suggestion up to this point that they're planning some big money move. I don't know whether Diaz is open to go to Saudi. Certainly, there's been interest in him from that part of the world previously. So, and I suppose if you're Liverpool, I think so much will depend on, does the player want to leave? Because I think the way that Liverpool tend to do things, if he wants to leave and there's an attractive enough offer on the table and it's early enough in the window, then why would you stand in his way? Especially when you've got Cody Gakpo, who, I think Gakpo's had a brilliant season. Just such a shame he picked up that injury when he did and has looked so rusty since he came back. But that would soften the blow somewhat of losing Diaz. But I think also if Diaz wants to stay put, then I think Liverpool certainly wouldn't be actively looking to offload him. So I think that's an interesting one. With Endo, I get the impression with Endo that he's quite happy with what he's got. I think he massively feels like he kind of hit the jackpot joining Liverpool at the latter part of his career. And I know from speaking to a few Japanese colleagues that there's a lot of kind of ongoing debate in Japan about, the fact that their captain is barely playing week to week, and only having to, he's been kind of Liverpool's finisher, hasn't he, coming on for the last 10 or 15 minutes of games. But at the minute, there's nothing to suggest that he'll be going. Whether, again, I think so much of that depends on Endo himself, whether he's content with this bit part role. Of course, Harvey Elliott's a completely different case because he's so much younger, and I feel sorry for Elliott. Actually, I do feel as if he's been underplayed this season. I think there's been a number of games when I've been sat there watching and thinking that surely this freshen things up. Give Harvey Elliott, some minutes. Just I think, it just feels like pretty much every time he has come on in games, he's impacted it in a positive way. Because I think the one thing that kind of struck me when you look at the kind of the lack of energy that probably, certainly he was there in extra time, wasn't it, against PSG, and then there in abundance at Wembley against Newcastle, was you thought, well, a lack of rotation has hurt Liverpool a bit here. So I think, you know, I think it's quite simple. I think, you know, I'm sure this has been part of the discussion behind closed doors, that it's like, well, either you give players like Harvey Elliott and Endo and Chiesa more minutes, and you know, you trust them at home to Southampton, when for me Liverpool should have rested a lot more players than they did, or you probably have to think about waving goodbye to them and bringing in players who are trusted more off the bench, because you know, certainly Chiesa, and I know Chiesa's obviously had an up and down time with trying to stay fit and all the rest of it, but when you look at what he did at Wembley when he came on, you know, not just the goal, but the way in which he gave Liverpool something they hadn't really had up to that point, you know, you're kind of scratching your head at why he hasn't played more.
Yeah, no, I think I speak for myself here. Like, for me, I'd love him to get more opportunities in the last 9 games of the season. In particular, I know everybody has that thought process of, oh, maybe Chiesa's just going to be moved on in the summer, but I'd love him to get more of opportunity personally anyway. But a quick question for you before we do shoot off. Thank you, John, for the comment as well. Can you ask James how many signings does he think will Liverpool will make this summer?
It's so difficult to say at the minute, while we're still waiting for clarity on the contracts, but my guess would be 4 or 5 would be my guess.
Okay.
Yeah, when I look at what I believe needs to be done, that's not me speaking from having been told by anyone internally that is how many they'll. But when I look at it from the outside, and you know, and again, you know, it stands to reason that if Van Dijk and Salah stay, there's a bit less that needs to be done in terms of the squad for next season. But yeah, my guess would be 4 or 5.
Is there any player you want to say before to add to it, or is it just something that's like, no, you could put any name there?
Yeah, I think it's too early. I mean, I think also at the minute, you know, despite all the planning that goes on behind closed doors, it's, you know, there is absolute full focus on winning the Premier League. You know, we're still in March. Yeah. It's, you know, that all of that can kind of wait for the summer. And, you know, it's going back to the kind of Trent, you know, it kind of, I think that's why there's been so few details that have come out up to this point, and people are left kind of almost like there's like a vacuum there that people have just filled themselves in terms of, you know, what they believe to be the case. Because I think if you're Liverpool and you're Trent, you know, you've just wanted to ensure there are no distractions, and you know, I think that stands to reason in terms of recruitment plans for next season in general, because the last thing you'd want to do at the minute is unsettle anything when you're 9 games away from glory.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will leave it there for tonight. Big thank you for everyone for tuning in as well. James, thank you very much for coming on. Is there anything coming up on The Athletic that's been written by you or anyone else coming up soon?
Loads of stuff. Yeah. We've got some decent interviews coming up over the next week or so. I can't name any names at the minute, but some exciting things in the pipeline. And yeah, like everyone, just looking forward to proper football returning. Well, we got a little taste of it at the weekend, haven't we? And then we have to wait till next Wednesday for the Reds back in action. So check out The Athletic for all our ongoing Liverpool content. And yeah, you can be sure that when there's some clarity on these contract situations, there'll be hopefully all the in-depth pieces on kind of how we reach that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, obviously, guys, go and check out The Athletic as well. But yeah, if you are new, of course, please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you guys in the next one. See you later. Ta-ra.